You are listening to AVFC Extra, a no-nonsense look at the club we all love. Brought to you by the Claret and Blue podcast.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of AVFC Extra. I'm James Rushton and today I'm joined by Reach PLC scouting expert Josh Williams to review, hopefully by the time you're watching this, an actual Aston Villa signing. Morgan Sanson is set to announce his move to Aston Villa this week. So by the time you're watching, hopefully that's all done and dusted and he's a Villa player. But in the meantime, here's the lowdown on Samson from a man who knows best, a man who's reviewed the stats, reviewed the footage and can tell us all about the new Villa man. Fingers crossed. Here's me and Josh Williams for the next 20 minutes speaking about Villa's new man. So Josh, how you doing?
Doing good, mate, yeah. It's been a while since I came on, but I think Dave's mentioned since that, you know, the last podcast that I appeared on, last podcast that he appeared on as well, the feedback's generally quite good, so I don't mind speaking to the Villa fan base, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they're really happy to speak to you after the 7-2, and of course David reviewing Ross Barkley, and it's just been like good news. So you always come on when there's good news. I think we had a tactical gap. We didn't want to bring you on after Liverpool beat the Villa in the FA Cup. So making up for it now by getting you on to review a hopeful new Villa signing, Morgan Sanson. We disagree. We don't know the pronunciation really. I've googled it. It seems to be Sanson, or the French variation of Samson. But Josh, what do you make of the move in general? I'm really intrigued to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's an interesting move. It's a signing I didn't expect Villa to make. I wasn't really actually aware that it was an area that Dean Smith was wanting to switch up a little bit. But with I think Hurricane's gone on loan, hasn't he? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's obviously an area that he wants to address. And this is a player that I was aware of. I have wrote about him in the past. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And as soon as you mentioned about speaking about him, sent me a message. I was a bit like, I was familiar with the name and stuff. So it's an interesting one, yeah.
Do you think it's interesting that you wrote about him before? Because one of the questions I did want to ask, kind of off script, is where would you have expected him to move? Do you expect, was this the right time to move to Villa? Is it a sign that Villa are on the up, acquiring a player like Samson? What in general do you think of that?
The teams I've linked him with in the past have been Wolves, and I think he was rumoured to be a scout from Leicester at a Marseille game, and I just got asked to do a general piece on who might the scouts have been looking at. That was just for our Leicester centre, and Sanson was one of the names I flagged in that piece. So he's a player who's been linked in and around with, I suppose, the teams that are in and around the top 10 wanting to push into Europe, I suppose. So for him to be getting linked with Villa and on the verge of signing, really, I suppose it is a good sign considering last season, Villa scraped relegation a little bit. This season, he seems to be making massive steps towards something bigger. And I think adding a player like this is only going to help that, really. I don't think he's a level below what Villa have currently got. I think he's going to help. I think he's going to ensure that if there's any rotation, any injuries, that the standard doesn't drop below a certain level. And yeah, I think it's a positive sign. What do
you think of his background? Could you dig into that a little bit? Did you expect him to still be in France at this point? Has he perhaps went under the radar since? I mean, we linked him with Leicester and Wolves. So has he been under the radar a little?
I think he has a little bit, but I think it's probably all just coincided nicely with his contract. To be honest, he's currently got 18 months left on his deal. So when a player gets to that stage, the club kind of has a decision: do we extend this player's deal, or do we move to sell him? And I think Villa have been able to exploit that a little bit with, I think, the rumoured fee. I think I'm right in saying is about 15 million. And I think that's probably solid value in the current market, especially in January. He's worth more than that. And although I suppose he's kind of been a little bit of a latecomer to the Premier League, he's still only really just entered his peak. He's recently turned 26 years old, I think. So he's still got, those prime years that we say between, say, 25 and 30. He's got a few of them to still give. And considering he's going to give those, for 15 million, I think it's a solid deal. But in terms of the way it's transpired and the age he's moving at, it's probably just the way his contracts have worked out, to be honest.
So what type of midfielder is he then? Because I'm really interested to see if you can pick out like a leading example of the type of midfielder is, probably a bigger name or someone actively playing in the Premier League right now who Samson replicates a little? What type of player is he?
Yeah, I tried to do that, to be honest, very late on today. I was thinking to myself, who can I compare this player to? Because he comes across to me quite interesting, because he looks like a good all-rounder. He looks like the type of player who's maybe 7 out of 10 across the board. And he kind of paints a picture of kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But not that's not a negative. That's a a reliable performer, if you like. But while also having that, he does have attacking qualities. He doesn't naturally attack, really naturally offer stuff that more than a typical central midfielder. Like, I think in England we have a perception that a central midfielder delivers goals and assists because of Lampard, Yaya Toure, Gerrard, players like this, but it doesn't really happen. Most central midfielders don't really do anything when it comes to offering goals and assists. At least, like, they might do stuff beforehand in terms of getting the team to the final third, but the actual goals and assists side, they don't usually deliver. But I'd say Samson does more so than normal, and I think the best example I can probably give, he's kind of like a cross between maybe a John McGinn, Abdoulaye Doucouré type. Like, I think there's obviously certain Premier League midfielders who are in the top bracket in terms of what they'll contribute. Like, I think Kevin De Bruyne, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain's quite attacking for the central midfielder. James Maddison, I think you could probably throw Ross Barkley in there as well. And I think then there's maybe a little bit of a step down to the likes of Yuri Tillemans, John Joe Shelby, maybe Ruben Neves, players who are still central midfielders, and they still offer a bit more in attack than a typical central midfielder, but not to the real top level whereby there's a goal or an assist getting posted every week. So he's kind of in and around that. That's the best way I can describe him, really. But he was a difficult player to nail, to be honest.
So we've seen that he can play all over the midfield, and he replicates kind of a mix and match of these high profile names. Where do you expect him to fit in at Villa? Because we've seen a little double pivot, a midfield three. Where does he fit in that specific tactical fit, or is he a different tactical fit? Who would he replace or back up even?
Yeah, that's a tricky one to answer, because about 70% of his minutes this season have came in central midfield. Last season, about 80% of his minutes came in central midfield, and most of the rest come as a number 10, usually. So he's quite versatile. He's actually played some minutes as a centre forward as well, and two completely random appearances as a right back, which, interesting. But if you're using a 4-2-3-1, which Dean Smith seems to be leaning towards lately, he can probably play as the number 10 or as one of the two sixes. And he's usually slightly favours the left side. So he's probably in direct competition, to be honest, with, at the minute, if Dean Smith was fielding his best 11 and he was using 4-2-3-1, you'd probably have a midfield two of McGinn and Douglas Luiz, and you'd have Ross Barkley as your 10 probably. I'd say if Sanson arrives, he's probably direct competition with McGinn and Barkley. I think you'd need to keep Luiz in there because he's slightly more defensive minded, and he's going to offer that to the team. I think if you put McGinn and Sanson in there, I think they could probably perform, but
yeah,
there's an element of overkill maybe in there. I think you'd maybe want to be a bit more safer than that if you're Villa, depending on the opponent that you're coming up against, I suppose. But to be honest, he's not a player that I'm certain will immediately come straight in, and I'm not sure Dean Smith is buying a starter unless Ross Barkley isn't retained beyond the summer, or unless he's thinking of switching towards a 4-3-3 or whatever. But I think it's just probably give Villa more rotation without dropping below a certain level, making Villa a bit more adaptable. If Ross Barkley had suffered this hamstring injury and Samson was available, Samson could have played as the 10. So it's just, I suppose, giving Villa more options. But in terms of the best 11, the best team on the field, Dean Smith's probably got a nice problem on his hands.
Well, it seems like, to go off script a little bit, a lot of people speculating about Douglas Luiz moving back to Manchester City because the situation is almost lined up perfectly for that to happen. If that was to happen, could Sanson, I know you say Douglas Luiz is more defensive, but is there any scope for Sanson fulfilling that role as a quick fix or as someone who can perform in it long term, or as something that can adjust that midfield three for Villa beyond the scope of this season?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see it tested. I mean, it's more probably a concern for me that the other central midfielder that Villa have is John McGinn, who's probably another who's slightly more offensive minded than the typical centre mid. So you'd have two there who are both willing to bag the odd goal and that sort of stuff. And yeah, I'd just be inclined to think, you know, are too many players going to get ahead of the ball? Like if you look at the Claret, for example, you know, he was fielded with Capoue at Watford. Since he's moved to Everton, he's kind of got Allen slightly behind him. So I think they could do it, and I think they'd need to work on the partnership. And Dean Smith would have to go out his way to instruct, you know, they want to stay behind the ball and stuff like that, and want to be a bit more defensive minded, maybe, or whatever. But in terms of being a replacement for Douglas Luiz, that's something I'm less certain about. What
do you think his strengths are then, Morgan Sanson? I know we said probably not expecting this immediate massive impact in the Premier League, but what do you really like about him, Josh?
I think his ability to deliver goals more than the average player is obviously a good thing. I think he's posted in and around 10 goals / assists combined in each of the past 3 seasons, which is obviously a positive. I think last season it was 5 goals, 4 assists. Season before, 5 goals, 3 assists. Season before that, 9 goals, 2 assists. So if you've got a player like that who is just inclined to post the odd goal or assist, considering football's a low-scoring game, it's just nice to have players across the board, all around the team, who are able to chip in with the odd goal. Villa have obviously got that threat from set pieces, so the centre-backs are delivering with the odd goal and assist. McGinn does. Samson now will. Ross Barkley, of course, will. And then you've got the attacking players who obviously will. So it's just nice to have more goals and assists around the pitch. It stems really from his ability to strike the ball. He's a nice striker of the ball, specifically when he's fed with maybe a rolling ball and he's got it with the first time. He seems to be quite good at hitting the ball with his first touch. As I said, 7 out of 10 in most areas. And if you look at his past few seasons, he doesn't tend to suffer from injuries too much, really. He's played between about 2,100 and about 2,500 minutes in each of the past 3 seasons in League One. That equates to about 25 full 90s across the season. So that, you know, that's solid. The general thing with injuries is players who suffer from them in the past will suffer from them again. It sounds a bit simplistic, but that's generally how it works. He did suffer a cruciate injury, I think it was 2015, but he does seem to have moved past that without any real problems. But yeah, he seems to be generally just another quite attacking player that Dean Smith can use. Dean Smith's generally quite an attacking coach, and in the summer he added attacking players, even as right back. You know, Matty Cash is quite an attacking right back, even as goalkeeper. You know, Emi Martinez. Yeah. Anytime he claims the ball, his first thought is always, can he instigate a counter-attack? Always runs towards the edge of the box and looks to get a counter-attack on the go. So just adding more and more attacking players to Villa's team, regardless of the position. So
what about the weaknesses? We've got to go on to the bad news now that we've had so much good news. Does Morgan Sanson have any major weaknesses that have stood out in his career?
The good thing is, I couldn't really find many. I suppose that's a positive thing. I was looking at it thinking, you know, I need to find some weaknesses here, but as I said, he's just kind of a 7 out of 10 in most areas. I suppose one department that he didn't show up the best in, let's say, is progressive passing. So his passing ability to move his team up the pitch wasn't the best. For the general comparison, I compared him to a few other centre midfielders who are roughly in a similar mould, let's say. So I just compared him to the Claret. Thomas Soucek, Sander Berg, and I just threw Gini Wijnaldum in there as well. And since the beginning of last season in the Premier League, Samson places bottom of that little group for progressive passes per 90. And in terms of the progressive distance in yards of his passes, he also places bottom. Not by much, but just it's suppose one of the areas where I just thought to myself, okay, you can probably highlight that considering the players he's beneath. But he does make up for that in another department, which we will get to.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been almost too much good news here. We're hearing a good, solid all-rounder that Villa needed, a surprising area in the midfield that we probably didn't think would have been reinforced until the summer. So, Josh, I think finally, is there anything that stands out in the stats about him? What specific highlight has really jumped out to you about Samson? And I feel like this might be hard since he's a 7 out of 10. He's fairly all right at everything.
No, usually you do have that specific department because of the wealth of stats available at the moment. You do have one department usually that a player stands out in. I kind of am able to hone in on that really and highlight why that's effective. That's usually why a team is buying a player. With Sanson, outside of goals and assists, which is quite obvious, just a generic aspect of his play, he tends to make up for the lack of progressive passing, let's say, by carrying the ball progressively. He seems he's quite dynamic on the ball, inclined to carry his team to the final third, really. And I compared him last season to the whole of League One for progressive carries and progressive carries into the final third. And for both of those stats, he generally places inside the top 20 in the league for total. Slightly ahead of maybe like a Renato Sanchez. Not sure if many people will be aware of him who will listen. And right behind Marco Verratti. So just kind of that ability to just get on the ball and carry your team forward with the ball at your feet. A bit like Grealish does, I suppose. He seems more inclined to do that than using his passing ability to do it. Which is, I suppose, a little bit of a stylistic thing and offers an insight into why his progressive passing numbers aren't maybe what you'd like them to be. Really
off script now, and I'm going to be asking you something that should be coming off the top of your head. So if you can't answer it, don't worry, Josh. But from everything that's said today, not an immediate impact, all-round 7 out of 10, fairly dynamic player with a lot of all-round strengths in loads of different areas. Someone who's a bit of a mismatch of Villa's current midfield trio. It sounds to me like this is very similar to a French signing Villa made a few years ago, Jordan Vertu, especially the Leicester comparison, being scouted by other clubs where the direction Villa wanted to go. It sounds very similar to that. And the positive that I take from that, because Vertu's time was short, swift, didn't have much time for an impact, is that he can sit on the bench and kind of come in and there's time for him to grow into that role. Does it seem at all similar to you to that? I don't know.
The positive with Sanson's concern, he's under no obligation to come in immediately. He doesn't have to perform straight away. That's always a positive. You know, me being a Liverpool fan, I've witnessed Liverpool buy certain players who have been signed and because of the lack of presence already in the team, they've had to immediately start playing from the off. Wijnaldum was one of those players. You know, we bought him from Newcastle, thankfully from England already, so he was kind of used to the league already. And he had to start playing immediately. Sadio Mane was the same. Klopp has only started to give players time in the background because he can. He's now able to do it. There's no rush. He doesn't have to start Fabinho in midfield because we've already got Henderson, we've already got, you know, Wijnaldum, Keita, whoever. So I think with this player, rather than him coming in immediately, not that he can't. I mean, he might do, but the pressure doesn't look like it'll be on from the off. And if a player does leave in the future, say for example a Douglas Luiz, and Smith has to switch up his midfield a little bit to maybe a different formation or whatever, it should be a case of Sanson's been at the club for a period of time. He's kind of embedded himself in slowly, less pressure on him, maybe coming on as a substitute a few times and that sort of stuff. And it's just kind of giving players the right number of opportunities, the right chances in the right environments to thrive, really. And I think when Villa had that season a few years ago, I'm not sure if Veretout was signed alongside, was it Jordi Amavi and Adama Traore and players like that. A few of those players from that summer have went on to have solid careers, but they were all bought at an age of, like, you know, not really ready yet. And I think the management at the time was Tim Sherwood, so it wasn't maybe the most ideal. So I think, I just feel like this maybe feels like it's a bit better set, a bit more suitable to Samson, and it's the situation is likely to be, you know, he's likely to get a better opportunity to show what he can do compared to Veretout a few years ago. Oh,
perfect. Where can people find you then if they want to bug you about Morgan Sanson and anything Villa, or the next time Villa play Liverpool? Because it's setting up a nice trilogy for the season now with that final showdown coming up in the league.
Yeah, you can find me at Distance Covered on Twitter, and if I do come on again, hopefully it won't be for a revisit of another 7-2. The way it's going at the minute with the form of Liverpool, and it's possible. But yeah, thanks for getting me on. I always enjoy doing these, and the responses and the feedback generally tends to be quite good. So hopefully this will be as well perceived as the 7-2 review.
Oh yeah, hopefully. We always leave so educated when yourself and Dave go on to teach us about players and matches and all sorts. I think the viewers really appreciate it. So Josh, thank you very much for coming on and telling us more about Morgan Sanson today.
Yeah, no worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to AVFC Extra, an additional dose of Aston Villa content for you, brought to you by the Claret and Blue podcast team. If you enjoyed the episode, please do get in touch with us, get involved in the comment sections, tweet us at Claret Blue Pod, or leave us a review on iTunes. We really do appreciate it. We'll catch you again very soon with some more content. Until then, up the Villa.